Welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by EM Burlingame of EM's newsletter. Just a couple of bits of housekeeping before we get started. For people that are frequent listeners to the podcast, this is not going to be an interview format. This is just going to be a back and forth conversation. I contacted EM after a recent appearance on Gold, Goats and Guns, which I thoroughly enjoyed listening to. Secondly, it's going to be unfiltered, it's going to be raw. So, again, some of the language will be colourful, but the whole purpose of this is to bring a dash of reality as to what's happened before and also what's going on now. So, all of the housekeeping being said, EM, thank you and welcome to the Contrarian Capitalist.
Thank you for having me.
So many places we could start, and I'm just going to throw some ideas out, and then feel free to take the lead. I know that from recent writings that you've done, looking at the Great Deception, looking at the ancient roots of that, modern reinventions of that, a seven-step playbook of deception, the financialist kill chain, and then also looking at a 400-year-old English cycle, so to speak. I don't know which one of them you want to start with. Take your pick.
Maybe we start, I think, both being of English and British Isles descent, right? Maybe we start with the 400-year Great Cycle that then, in the last iteration, the 1600s, embedded the financial kill chain in, in the British Isles, in what would become the British Empire and thereby the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and greater India, right? Because Pakistan, Bangladesh were, right? So maybe we start with, you're familiar with Neil and Howe theory, or Strauss and Howe, excuse me, Neil Howe, Strauss and Howe theory, the saculums, right?
Hmm.
The saculum cycles.
Vaguely
So I,
familiar, but it might be worth explaining just for people that
Yeah,
might not have an
so
idea.
there's four generations. They roughly run in a cycle, 80 to 100 year cycles, and they just kind of repeat. Well, I wouldn't say repeat, but they do have sequels, right? Um, I stumbled across, so the Greeks talked about saculums. That's why they call them a saculum, because the Greeks talked about it 3,000 years ago. This seeming long lifespan of a single individual kind of cycles. And and then I ran across Strauss and Howe a few years ago, but when I was writing the book The Eternal War, and I was noticing that I'd already for some years noticed that there was also a 400-year cycle, which is, what is that, roughly, gosh, I can't even, four saculums, roughly, depending on whether they're long or shorter saculums, right? Um, and I noticed that in the English speaking world, what would become later, the English speaking world, but actually was founded by Alfred the Great. And really the work began under his grandfather, Egbert, right? Um, and of course, they didn't live as long back then. So those periods are shorter. But I had been noticing since I was young that there seemed to be this like 400-year major cycle in the history of the English speaking people. And and then a few years ago, I guess about 5 years ago, when I was writing The Eternal War, and I ran across Strauss and Howe theory, and then I realized, oh wow, okay, that's four saculums. And so I don't, I have no idea why. I suspect it actually has something to do with the nature of the English language in some complex way that even as a computational engineer, I don't quite understand. Um, but it seems that you know, Alfred the Great, in his own way, was picking up on this 400-year cycle because 400 years before him was when the Romans left. And
Hmm.
400 years before that was when the Romans arrived. And we don't know about, maybe this cycle's been going on in the British Isles for, thousands of years before. We just don't have the records of it. But, what is this? this 400-year great cycle, the best that we know it is articulated in the dooms of Alfred, right? The codification that would become under Athelstan 60 years later, the English peoples, right? The English civilization, or the genesis of what would go on to become the English civilization. Um, and 400 years on from Alfred and his codification, which was a conflict, and it was a conflict over the balance of power between princes, the oligarchs today,
Mhm.
the parliamentarians, at the time they weren't parliamentarians, they were, the king's court and governments, um, and the people. And Alfred took, you know, first off, there's no such thing as an English people. There's no English ethnicity. The English are a civilization. They're a society, a culture. And a language, a linguistic group. Um, what would become the English-speaking peoples were Danes and Frisians and Angles and Saxons and Jutes and Britannies, and there wasn't a lot of them left around, and Scotty, and it was like a whole mix of five major ethnic groups, very different cultures and societies, and Alfred had to figure out how to weave that all together, and so he came up. Okay, so 400 years on from there, after that codification in laws about this balance of power, which is unique in all of the history of the world of a people, right? A mixed ethnic group, cultural warring peoples that came together around a code of laws and a society and principles. 400 years on from there, we fought that out again. And that was, what came out of that. So what came out of the wars of Alfred and his son and grandson were the dooms of Alfred. It was this codification of English law, common law, right? And from the king to the commonest man, we were all subject to the same law. 400 years on, things had become corrupted, and we fought that out again. And that was the barons with their people. People think, oh, it was just the barons fighting for themselves. Well, the barons couldn't have fought King John without the people, without their people.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right? It's like there was what, 4,000 barons and they could fight king's armies, right? It's like people forget, we forget in this modern era where we down with princes. It's like, come on, princes and people have been intimately woven together throughout history. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have the freedoms we have. So 400 years on, they fight out this balance again, right? It become imbalanced and it didn't get destroyed. It got codified even further,
Hmm.
a refinement in the Magna Carta. And in particular, the Magna Carta, there was one man who made sure that the Magna Carta not only happened, but held, and that was Lord Pembroke, right? William Marshall, the greatest knight, right? Um, with, by the way, the support of Eleanor of Aquitaine, Her Majesty the Queen, I think, the most extraordinary woman. I think Eleanor of Aquitaine did more to shape Europe's history than any other woman, individual, right? Extraordinary woman. Um, okay, Magna Carta, further codified. What did it do? It limited the government's power, right? We think king, but a king was just a man without a government, without a structure, without you know, a regulatory body, etc. King was just a man.
Hmm.
King didn't act himself. He was probably off diddling the maid or something, right? It's a matter of, you know, his court and his magistrates and the sheriff. You know what I mean? Same thing we have today. So we like to look at kings and go, well, the king did that. It's like, no, the king didn't do that. That was the court. That was, the government of its time. The king was just the executive, right? Like the prime minister or the president or, well, not your current prime minister. That guy can. Anyways, I won't go there. I'll get you banned. Uh, I think that's the least prime minister England has ever had. Uh,
Yeah, not good. I'm sure we'll get onto that. I read a story the other day about that he's looking to do a deal with the EU for the Rock of Gibraltar, and I think that might just tip people over the edge.
oh,
if
You know what?
if
I've got,
mad,
yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. That might hit people.
it
Yeah.
might just tip people over the edge if that happens. But that's all I can say on that so far.
I used to be in the yacht business I lived on the island of Corsica, and our shipyard was in Viareggio, Italy, and our corporate offices in Marseille. So I know a lot of yachties in the area. We'll just, I'll just call some of my friends. We'll show up at the Rock with yachts. We'll just ring it off. We'll have to figure out weapons. We'll talk to the IRA, see if we can get some of their old weapons and ammunition. And yeah, that's an interesting thing. You know, they just blacked out the comms. So they did a power blackout in Spain recently.
Mhm.
And then yesterday they did complete telecommunications blackout. It's a
Really?
warning. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just popped up in my feed this morning. So back to the 400, right? So,
Mhm.
so in the conflicts and wars that Alfred and his son and grandson fought to unify the British Isles, not Ireland yet, but the main isles of the British Isles, what came out of that was the common law, English common law. And that's based off two principles: individual sovereignty, the
Mhm.
individual, common man, from the king to the common man, everyone's sovereign. Now, what comes with that sovereignty, though, is responsibility. You're also individually responsible, which is why I think the welfare state introduced to the United Kingdom destroyed it, because that is like the absolute antithesis of English civilization. The second one was, in order to be individually sovereign, you have to have the right to private property. From the wealthiest person to the poorest person, you still have to have right of private property. Why? Because you can't be individually sovereign if you don't own your own, yourself first as property, your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own emotions, your own, right? So 400 years on, then we get the Magna Carta, and it further, limits the power and maintains a distribution of power between people, prince, and what would later become parliament, but government, right?
Mhm.
Okay. 400 years on from, so that's the 1200s, right? 1215-ish. 400 years on from there, well, we have another little kerfluffle about how unbalanced everything had become. And well, what was that? Well, that was the Civil War. That was the English Civil War.
Mhm.
And that one got so heated, we actually, and I think we have never recovered from this as the English speaking peoples. We killed a king. We
Mhm.
beheaded a king, and he wasn't a bad king, and he was no tyrant. He was trying to fight what was coming, and we tore him down and let him be killed. I don't think we've ever recovered from that as a people. Um, what came out of that, right? In the inglorious, I'll never call it a glorious revolution because it wasn't. It was a coup. It was a bloody coup, right? Fostered by six nobles and parliament that was taking power to itself, which Cromwell had for 30 years tried to prevent.
Mhm.
And I'm not a fan of Cromwell. God, when I looked at what Cromwell did to the Irish, it's like, oh my, it's like, oh, you just can't. And what he did to the English, and what he did to the nobility, he gutted the nobility that had survived the frickin' War of the Roses. Cromwell came along 300 years later and just gutted it, right? I mean, just
Mhm.
gutted it.
Mhm.
And we've never recovered from that. And oh, by the way, we did it again. The few that survived, we killed them all off in World War One, right? So, but point being is, 400 years on from Magna Carta, we have the Inglorious Revolution, and while it has its problems, and we're dealing with that now, where we let the
Mhm.
Dutch take over, and then Germans have sat on the throne, in the executive seat ever since. Um, and we carved off, the city of London as a beachhead for the Dutch in a safe, secure area, so they didn't have to worry about all the wars they were doing on the continent. They were secure. What came out of it, though, was the English Bill of Rights, and that's a good thing, right?
Mhm.
That now, whether that was ever upheld or not, that's same argument about the Constitution here in the United States. But what came out of that conflict, that 400, the culmination event of that 400-year cycle was the English Bill of Rights, and that's very solid, and that would lead to the United States Constitution, and it would lead to the U.S. Bill of, the Bill of Rights here in the United States. Well, the Declaration and then the, related Bill of Rights. Okay, well, that was culminated in the 1680s, but really started in the 1620s, 1630s. Well, that was 400 years ago.
Mhm.
Where are we now? I mean, look at the chaos and just I think in a whole different way, of course, because of the time.
Mm.
I think peoples from the mid 1600s, the mid or the early 1200s, the late 800s, the early 400s, I think they would see the same world as we see today in our, the same dynamic, not the same world, of course, but the same dynamics that we see today, right? Where everything has become so skewed, so corrupted, right? And again, back to the language thing, I suspect this has to do with the nature of the English language because our language is so precise and yet so flexible. It's why people around the world, I've done business in finance and banking and special operations all over the world. And I've had people from other languages say, no, we want to talk in English. We want to work in English because English, right? Exactly what I said. There's a flexibility and yet it's very precise
Yep.
when it wants to be, not when you're arguing with your lady, right? So that's what I think these 400-year great cycles, they repeat, well, again, not repeat, but they have these sequels
Mhm.
and these sequels are predictable. And the exact timing, not so much. And it's the events when the breakdown starts and then the culmination where there's a code of, on the other side of a fight. It's never been without an actual bloody fight. But
Mhm.
sometime at the end of that breakdown period, which turns out to be about a saeculum,
Mhm.
we do have a new codification, a more refined, more precise understanding of the balance, the sharing of power amongst the princes, the wealthy elite, and that's not just rich people. That's actual oligarchs, right? People who are actually engaged and actually involved, and not just
Mhm.
rich,
Mhm.
right? And the people, and what in the British system is called parliament, but government writ large. To wit, since 1688, and really even before, the king is the executor, the executive branch, or supposed to be the executive branch, as we have here in the United States with the president, right? So the last 400 years cycle, unfortunately, while we came out with the English Bill of Rights, which is solid, great, and a better check and balance on power, unfortunately, we allowed a foreign enemy in the destruction we brought to ourselves to come in at the behest of parliamentarians, at the behest of six nobles, to occupy the executive offices and branch the throne, the crown, for the last 400 years. And they're trying to do it again. Same bloody people. But now it's the United States because this is where the new locus of powers is shifted to. And what happened there in that 400 years ago, they embedded the financial kilting in what would become the entire British, the British Empire,
Mhm.
and spread it around the world. And then in the 1940s, the same people did it again, but in the United States with the establishment of the Five Eyes, the intelligence agencies. They embedded it here as well. And the partnerships of Wall Street. People can look that up, Dulles, Alan Dulles, and et cetera, et cetera. So, so I think I'll stop there. Yeah.
There's a there's a lot to unpack there, and I think well, let's roll back to the 17th century in England because I think that's really I know that we were saying off air and in the previous couple of weeks when we were exchanging messages, that one area that I wanted you to really go into, or for us to explore, certainly was, as you call it, the Inglorious Revolution in 1688, followed very quickly, 6 years later, by the inception of the Bank of England in
Yeah.
1694. And of course, that's had ramifications across the globe. I would say for anyone that has an interest in history, do go and read about Charles I, King Charles I, King Charles Stuart. Very, I'm going to say underrated, misunderstood monarch, and you alluded to that there. I agree with that sentiment completely. I think how history's been written, same things to do with Richard III, always portrayed by the Tudors as absolute evil.
Yes.
The guy was in
Yes.
such a catch-20. He was in a damned if he does, damned if he doesn't
Yes.
situation,
Yes.
but he's
Yes.
been portrayed, of course,
Yeah.
by the Tudors through propaganda. Uh, that being said, yeah, let's look at the Inglorious Revolution. Let's look at the events that's led to that, and then, of course, on to the inception of the Bank of England, and then we can bring that into more modern day, what's going
Yeah.
on today, if that's okay.
Yeah. 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 So first off, I do very much appreciate what you articulated about Richard III. I'm not so knowledgeable about. I do agree with you. When it comes to His Majesty King Charles I do believe when you take out the occupying force's control of the narrative, the occupying force that took over in 1688, and you go back and you read the things at the time, His Majesty was actually fighting for the English people. He was trying to prevent this modern world, this financialist world where everybody's indebted to taxes, wages, taxes, and debt. He was trying to prevent that from happening in the British Isles, in what would become the United Kingdom. And he was killed for it. And not to equate them together because they were very different, but all of the conditions were very same. Well, that reminds me of an American president that was shot and murdered
Mm,
in Dallas,
mm,
Texas,
hmm hmm
right? So, okay. What forces, what kind of people in the what well, I don't want to quite say it that way. It is a mindset, but the same elements that killed both are the same element.
hmm
It's the financialist. Um, the Bank of England was established. The city of London was carved in the city of London, which was carved out as its own independent, completely owned, foreign owned, banking owned headquarters for it was the new Dutch East India Company's headquarters. It was for all, straight up. And that's the old Venetian banking system. That's 1,000 years on. And they embedded this, what was the Peace of Westphalia? The Peace of Westphalia was a banker takeover. It was a financialist, not so much just traditional bankers, but financialists, right? People who were going, oh, you know what? We can use this whole stock market thing that we created, and we can use the derivatives that we created and these synthetic instruments, and we can make vast fortunes. And but we've got something in the way, and what we got in the way are these princes. They own all the assets, and they own the labor, and all industry was coming up, and we need the labor. So, you know, we had weakened. Give me 1 second. The War of the Roses did a big number on us, on our
hmm
nobility, right? We really, really went to war with ourselves and really almost came undone in the War of the Roses. It weakened us. And the Tudors emerged out of that. And we had three monarchs in a row from the 1500s into this early 1600s who were quite literally batshit fucking insane. Henry VIII,
Yep.
Queen Mary,
Yep.
Queen Elizabeth I.
Yep.
That shit fucking insane,
Mm-hmm.
right? And under Mary and Elizabeth, what had been set in motion by the senior Tudor, Henry's father, um, what had been set in motion was already moving to setting, was going to become this major thing in the world. But it was infused at that juncture, and I'll get back to 1600s because this is what set this up. At that critical moment where it was starting to take off. So think of a child, like a young child in the loving embrace of its mother, learning all of these skills, right? Its father comes and helps, and understands here and there. And then the child, that's, 3.5 years of age, the physical brain's laid down for the rest of your life. By age 7, okay, well, that was the British people, the English speaking peoples, the British Empire at the time. Its mother was batshit insane, Elizabeth I. I mean, like certifiably insane. So that child had some issues, some trauma issues. The British
Mm-hmm.
peoples, right? The British Empire had some trauma issues. Okay. Then we went and fought a civil war. We tore down a king. Point being is we allowed these foreigners to to terror, to benefit from the differences and the fights and the conflicts and everything that was going on amongst ourselves, to then in the 1600s, you know, um, after Cromwell, to come in and buy up Parliament and buy up princes, pay off their debts and give them access to deal flow, because anybody who's been on the financial world, it's not that I need your money. I don't need you to pay off my debts. I need access to good quality deals that have low counterparty risk. Well, the Dutch East India Company could provide that for nobles who had invested in the British East India Company that wasn't doing so well because it was totally conflicting with itself and had bad management. And so, okay. So 1688, we had a hostile takeover that has sat on the throne of England ever since, right? These foreigners have sat on the throne of England ever since. And, some of them have been good monarchs, get it, but they haven't had any power. It's been constitutional power has increasingly gone to Parliament, but really not to Parliament. They're useless. They've been useless from the beginning. That's why Cromwell said, be gone, by God, be gone, or whatever his brilliant statement was, right? You're useless, basically. Um, the City of London, the financialist kill chain, the banking system, how do you use, the United States have been dealing with this since its inception, but really since the World War II. But since its inception, it's get in with financialized money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not asset backed. Well, asset backed, but hypothecated many, many times, derivative, and embed this kill chain around the world, and then use the government that you own, financially own, of that country, and the intelligence infrastructure you've been building out since Venice 1,000 years ago across all of Europe and much of the world, and use the martial capacities of the people of that land, in this case, the 1600s, right? The British, to go enforce collection of debts, war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Military action. Smedley Butler, American Marine Corps general said, war's a racket. Well, that's what he meant. It's like, the military is the collections, right? The violent collections department of the banks. And all of that was embedded in the English speaking peoples, for the last 400 years in uh, in the Inglorious Revolution, and then the carving out of the City of London as a separate entity, the instantiation of the Bank of England. Um, Everything that's happening today is a direct result of one, the War of the Roses, 2, the Tudors, and then 3, this hostile takeover of the British East India Company by the Dutch East India Company in the late 1600s, which was then established, instantiated as a hidden government, global government, with the Bank of England.
It's why there's a lot going on under the surface. One date I just wanted to put on that we obviously spoke about the execution of Charles I. That was
Oh,
1619, and then funnily enough,
yeah,
the first Anglo-Dutch War started in 1652. So, but again, it's putting. We said at the start, we're going to be testing not just testing your knowledge, but sort of getting you to put two and two together and trying to make four. Because once you realise what Charles was standing against and what he was fighting for, as you said, again, he's executed 3 years later. The first of, I think it's four Anglo-Dutch wars
yeah.
start. So again, it's just putting these pieces of the puzzle together, which was one of
Well,
the ideas of having you
if
of
I
having
might,
you on.
terribly sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but to that point, the first Anglo-Dutch War was actually the English Civil War. Who bankrolled that? Who backed
Mm,
that? What nobles got on the side, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
who on the Isles was able to be, a noble, a lord, and lords? So look at Pym. Look at the work, Pym, right? The parliamentarian, the lead one at the time. I'm terrible with names, but um, look at the funding that was pouring in from continental bankers to industrialists on the Thames River in the early 1600s as industry was starting to build out on the Thames River. Okay.
Mhm.
Look at where that banking money came from. It was the continent and it was Amsterdam. Look at um, the conflicts from 1600 on when the British East India Company, so 1600 to 1602, 1602 was the Dutch East India Company. Look at the conflicts of the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company starting in the early 1600s. And look at the conflicts around, look at the flows of money, okay. So the first war with the Dutch really began as moving from cold business war, banking war of the
Mhm.
British East India Company versus the Dutch East India Company. And the Dutch were way better, right? Way more effective at business and finance, et cetera, because they benefited from Venetian banking that was
Mhm.
over 1,000 years old and trade and commerce and all of that. And they benefited from old Roman stuff and Phoenician stuff, et cetera, in the Levant area there, et cetera. Um, the real war, when it went from cold business finance war to hot, the first, Anglo-Dutch war was really the English Civil War. And that didn't culminate till 1688, right? And then there was the 30 Years' War that the Dutch were fighting with the Spanish and,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So
Yeah, a lot going on there. I was just you would see my eyes sort of go elsewhere for a second. John Pym was the person that you
Pym,
were
yeah. Yeah,
referring
yeah,
to
yeah.
there.
Horrible. John Pym did more. There are congressionals in the United States over the last 10 years that remind me immensely of John Pym, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck
Mhm.
Schumer, right? That have done. Pym Pym did more to destroy the English, to betray the English than any other person ever in history, I believe.
Which again is funny and sad at the same time, given I'm just going to read this from what I can see I'm only on
Yeah.
Wikipedia, so it's not exactly the bastion of information. But he's been described in 1895. This is John Pym, but he's been described as the greatest member of parliament that ever lived and also a true revolutionary. So it's funny how history or people like to shape things in order to maybe suit their narrative, shall we say.
People say that the winners write history. It's not true. The weak little rim, the weak limp-wristed little bastards write and rewrite history again and again to make them look like they have strong arms and strong wrist when they were cowardly little shits who sold us out. But that's just my take.
No, that's fair, and that's understandable. But also, again, point of having you on and having this chat. So we've gone through, just to recap where we've gone so far. So we've touched on 400-year cycles. So we started with effectively King
Alfred.
Alfred, Alfred the
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So I was getting my words
His
confused. So we
Majesty.
started with Alfred the
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Then we've headed over to 13th century Magna Carta 1215, etc. of King John. Then we've looked at effectively 17th century Britain, King Charles I, events that have led up to that as well. And then, of course, what we're seeing go on today. So just going back to this Inglorious Revolution, excuse me, in the Bank of England. So we've got 1688 hostile takeover, and again, you've written ad nauseum on this. I'll put some links in for some articles that come with this video and post as well. We then got Bank of England in 1694, and then really from there, it seems as though it's a very similar playbook, as in, the financial elites throwing their toys out the pram at every opportunity. I think I read somewhere, I think this is true, a couple of things. A bit of insider trading after the Battle of Waterloo. I read that. That was
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
absolute madness. Well, again, fair play, but madness at the same time. But also, with the Napoleonic Wars, I'm understanding that Napoleon was actually, he was fiscally, as in financially, very astute. He left a massive amount of gold and silver in the vaults over in Paris, and I don't think the bankers like that, and that's probably why we saw the Revolutionary Wars. Sorry, the Napoleonic Wars. That's my take. I don't know if you want to add anything to that or change my
Okay,
narrative.
okay. Yeah, no, no, no. So give me a second. You got to a very, I think the what got me down all this path some years ago, as I was recovering from traumatic brain injuries from late military service and special operations. Um, I've been trying to understand where this down with princes started and where it came from, because if you look throughout history, it's never the people that bring about great change. It's princes, and they bring the people with, bring some substantive number of the people with them. But it's always the princes. The Magna Carta didn't come about because of the people. The English Bill of Rights didn't come about because of the people. The common law upon and the principles of the English civilization didn't come about because of the people. Those were kings and nobles who did that. And they fought that out. And yes, they brought their people and their people were there. And it was a union and a bond, right? Without the pairing of the princes and the people, it didn't work. There would be no sharing of power. When I look back, I look at what the Venetians did to use their financial knowledge to start bringing down princes. What has historically stood in the way of financialist total and absolute control of the kill chain or strong, capable hereditary princes? And that's, barons all the way up to dukes and kings, etc. Two great, two men in history in roughly 200 years apart, 150, 60 years apart. Cromwell and Napoleon both ran into the same realization. They both were revolutionaries. They had bought into this down with princes, we don't need princes mindset. What did they both realize? They realized, oh, actually, the bankers are trying to take everything over and they don't care about the people. They have no accountability. They're trying to put an unaccountable system in place where they can enslave the people. And they'll be nameless and faceless. And, unlike a prince who lives in the palace, pitchforks can go tear him out of his bed at night. These bankers are building a system of total and absolute slavery. And Cromwell and Napoleon both stood up against that, right? There's a
Mhm.
reason Cromwell was buried in Was it Westminster? Um,
think so.
and I know he was dug up later and horrible things happened, etc. But he's buried as a king, basically, right? Because he realized, and the same thing to Napoleon. Napoleon said it. He said it outright. He said, "I realized the crown was in the gutter, and somebody had to pick that crown up and wear it as an accountable prince." And that's why the Dutch East India Company, Amsterdam, and its military capacities, the British had to tear Napoleon down. Why? Because Napoleon was reversing the trend, going back to princes,
Mhm.
because that was the only chance the people had. And that was completely against what the bankers wanted, the financialists wanted. That was, that would prevent the kill chain. So, um, yes, Napoleon did leave a substantive, he made substantive reforms. He substantively stood up and fought for the people and was responsible with their taxes and the revenues and the expenditures and the spending. Financialists don't want that. They need the chaos. They need this kill chain going so they can, unaccountably enslave and extract. Napoleon and Cromwell, and again, I'm, uh, I am no fan of Cromwell, but I think now as I'm getting older and I've studied more and more, I think Cromwell was trying to do the right thing. Napoleon certainly was, and you can see it in his own writings. And where are we today? The crown's in the gutter, and somebody needs to pick that damn thing up and put it on.
Mm,
And
mm.
as much as he is still the king, and I respect His Majesty King Charles III, I don't know why he chose the name Charles. That's just never gone well for any English king, right? I wonder that though. That's a whole different conversation, but um,
I want to go into that, Ian, because you've got a good point there. Of all names that he could have picked, he's
he's got like
plumped
eight
with
names.
Charles. Yeah, and
He's
he's
got
plumped with that
eight
one.
names. He could have picked one that was like, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna Again, I'm getting older now, and I've seen a lot of things, and just had my 58th birthday. Never thought I'd make it this long, just because I'm retarded and do stupid things. It's been a fun ride. But as I'm getting older, and I think maybe now as we're getting into we're getting close to the culmination event of this 400-year cycle, right? And there's going to be, it's already happening. We see it, right? This was it Mike Benz, the Canadian professor there, who's saying England's already in a civil war? I think he's right. I think Civil War II, English Civil War II, is happening. I think it's coming about. It's just not obvious, right? But it's being fought out in all kinds of ways. Um, as we're now getting to this, His Majesty's life is put in a lot more perspective because this end of the 400-year cycle, this conflict culmination where what's going to come out is going to be a rebalancing of power. And I do believe, I hope, that His Royal Highness does pick up the crown out of the gutter and actually wears it,
Mm.
right? I think now to His current Majesty, I think he's a rather tragic figure. And I think he's been a rather tragic figure since he was young. I think some part of him has known, and it's become just more and more obvious as he's gone along, that he is going to be a Charles. He's going to be, and I mean in the classical sense of a King Charles, right? That he's going to be this guy in an impossible situation, in an impossible time,
Mm-hmm.
who's going to take the blame and the fall for everything. And I think he's doing the best. And again, this is like I'm coming to grips with my own, because I dislike this man. Again, he's still the king. I respect him. I respect him as a crown prince, genuinely. But I've disliked him my whole life. And now I'm sitting here and I'm remember, Her Majesty's on my wall right there. That's that,
Hmm.
right? So uh, I remember her death and I remember what he did afterwards. And it stunned me, the speeches he gave and the travel around the core of the British Empire, to Wales and Scotland and Ireland and I was really rather impressed. And what was he doing? I think he's a tragic figure. I think he's in an impossible situation his entire life in an impossible time, just like King Charles I. And doesn't give him a pass for everything, of course, right? But he's a man, right? We all make mistakes. The question becomes one of, does somebody in the core of the English speaking, the English civilization, sometime in our life within the next, by the end of the next decade or sooner, pick up the bloody crown and wear it? And what does that mean? Rally the banners. And I mean that in the old sense. Rally the banners. Call your bannermen to you. See who stands and who doesn't. And let's restore the core of, let's remove this financialist parasite from the core of the English speaking peoples. Power shifted to America. Power's never going to be in London again. That's, the same way with the rise of Constantinople and Byzantium out of Rome, right? It's just such a parallel to the United States right now. But somebody's still got to wear the crown. I know that's a little bit of a aside, right? But um, I think His Majesty is a tragic figure in an impossible situation, and there's nothing he can do, no matter how good he might be, to be right. Um, to come out of this in his lifetime as anything but what he is and what he's perceived as. I think maybe in time, in history, if we reset the core of the English people, we remove these financialists, we get back to hereditary princes, the hereditary princes pick up their obligation again for the people and stop chasing money. If that happens, then, I think this 400-year cycle is going to turn out all right. Now we got, I just hate to say it, but it's the truth. As an unconventional warfare guy, bloodshed's coming.
Mm.
It's coming. There's, it'd be, history doesn't end. We're still living it. We're still living what His Majesty King Alfred the Great set in motion 1,200 years ago.
Yeah, we are, and I think that let's sort of not wrap up quickly, because I think, again, I know that from reading a lot of different things from a lot of different people, some people are oblivious to what's gone on before us. Some people don't want to think about what's coming down the road. I've always prided myself, and I know you do too, from your writings and everything that you do, provided ourselves, prided ourselves, if I get my words out properly, of being realistic and speaking the truth. So what you've just said, I perceive that to be a truth. It
Hmm.
it's coming. Something's coming. Now, what theatre of war, unfortunately, that's going to be in, I'm not too sure on that, but it's coming. And again, as we've alluded to throughout the whole of this episode, this is the end of this or in and around this 400-year cycle. So again, from your experiences, from your writings, from what you're seeing, what do you think is likely to happen next, and where, if any, locations are applicable?
If the pattern holds, and it always has for the last 1,200 years, right? The war's at home this time. It's at home. It's not overseas. They're not going to get that. They're not going to be able, right? The financialists are not going to get us to do this anymore because there's no more for them to take from us. We're done fighting their wars. overseas. We're done killing, in the global war on terror, we killed 4 million, somewhere between 4 and 11 million people. We don't know. We're done doing that. We're done enslaving our people. We're done with this madness where they're transing our kids
Mm.
and having our kids, mutilated. We're done. We're done with this. And there's no war with anybody in the world that's going to remove that from our own countries, our own cultures, our own governments, right? Our own, that we're just riddled, right? It's when a warrior is has come down with malaria and he's in the worst of the malarial attack. He can barely get out of bed, much less go fight the French on the fields of Agincourt, right? We are that warrior and warrior people, and we're riddled through with parasitic infection right now. And there's no amount of going fight somebody else that's gonna cure us of that. This fight now is at home, and we've got to remember who the hell we are and where the hell we come from, and the fact that it's pretty extraordinary. And we've been through this almost exact thing, although in its own way and its own difference, 3 times already, maybe 4 times, maybe five. If you go back to 44 AD when the Romans first arrived, we've been through this and we've made it through, and we've done all these extraordinary things. And we need to get rid of these continental European parasites and their government officials that they own at every level. We need to get, and I don't know, but let us not, however, repeat the mistake we made the last time that allowed these parasites to take over, to infect us and take over, which is behead a king. Let us not go there, because His Majesty is and the king and the crown are not the problem. They have no real power. They're symbolic, and that's powerful. That's amazing. That's astounding. Only the king or the crown prince could raise the banners. And boy, millions of people would come, by the way, from all over. I mean, literally. I know guys would come in an instant from all over the world, even Americans, right? Because down underneath, we are all still English. So where the conflict happens now is at home, because it has to, because we have to get rid of this parasite that's been living upon us and destroyed us for 400 years. It's got to go. But what made it possible for that parasite to infect us is we allowed our king to be killed. We
Mm.
do not do that again. We do not. Now, does His Majesty need to go aside? And I don't know if His Majesty, he's not very healthy. You can see kidney issues because of the swell in his
Yeah,
hands and all
yeah,
that. So
yeah.
I don't think His Majesty's long for the world anyways. And God bless. I know he's had genuinely rough life. I mean, imagine watching all of this happen, right? The culmination period of a 400-year great cycle and not being able to do fuck all about it.
Hmm.
Imagine living and knowing you're going to be the king at some point, right? And in his case, I really wonder if he really prayed that his mother outlived him,
Yeah,
because,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
right? I really wonder sometimes if his Majesty really just hoped his mother would outlive him. Because imagine being so, and I know people, I'm sorry, I'm going to just a little pause, right? I know people are angry with Harry,
Hmm.
good Prince Harry. But can you imagine being a prince, a royal, in line to the throne? I think fourth at the time, in line to the throne. Might be a little mistaken there, but something, within a hand's breadth of the throne, right? And realized, and having fought in war and acquitted himself well and served and done all the right things, to realize I got no power to help my people. I got no power to help soldiers, people he does. He cares a lot about them. I know guys that he tried to help, with some people I know, get traumatic brain injury and care to people, and he got cock blocked everywhere. Could you imagine what is and then growing up watching your father, who's going to be king one day, also be power? Could you imagine? It's like At some point, it'd be like, why am I doing this? So I can have a fancy car and a nice house and I can go get a job. Or, you know what I mean? It's like at some point, it's like you've got to be like, why the hell am I doing this?
Mm,
Taking all this vitriol and all this, and I got no power. It's like everybody's angry at me for not doing something. It's like you do realize we're a constitutional monarchy and all the powers in parliament, and that asshole sitting in 10 Downing Street's the fucker who's actually really responsible. And these MPs sitting here, et cetera, are the ones that are doing all this. And yeah, I live in a palace, but I live in a palace like a caged bird that's somehow
mhm.
responsible for everything. It's like at some point, again, I'm not giving His Royal Highness a pass or any of that, Harry a pass, right? But it's just like, has anybody really taken a step back, thought about King Charles's life? And the fact that that man realized one day he was going to have to be the king and he was going to get blamed for all this shit and he'd never had any powers, real powers since he was a kid. And his son, right? His younger son is dealing with the same thing. And people could talk about His Royal Highness being illegitimate and all that stuff. It might be true. I don't know. It doesn't matter. He grew up with his brother, who's the future king of England, right? He grew up with Her Majesty and King Charles raising him as a son. So I don't, and it's not like bastards haven't been around in the English throne in the right.
True.
In fact, there's a great chapter in a book, The Royal Bastards or something. I can't remember. It's a Cambridge Press book, but it goes into the history of how the bastards actually often are the ones who save the crown and save the family because they're not a threat to sit on the throne, but they were raised by the throne. They understand it and they go do the shit that the people on the throne can't do.
Might have
But
to
that's
hunt
a
that
whole
down. That sounds like a
conversation
good
for
read.
another
Yeah, that sounds
time,
like a good read. Yeah.
right? So, yeah. So I went off there, but um, yeah, I think we're heading into a period of time. Conflicts. It's at home. There's no more. I mean, come on. England's going to go to war with the world. You got what, 25,000 combat troops? And you probably got 5,000. Can you field at any time? So what? Right? You're going to go fight the world? Come on. The fight's at home. Uh, are we going to end up with a Cromwellian kind of figure? I don't know. Probably. Now, is that somebody who actually wears the crown, or is it a non-royal? I don't know. Right? These cycles, you know, they come and go, et cetera, every 400 years. So I don't know. But again, the English civilization is 1,200 years old and it's astounding. It's done astounding things. And it was set in motion by a king.
Mhm.
Everything that's befallen the British peoples, the peoples of the British Isles, the impoverishment, everything that's happened because we allowed a king to be beheaded. So whatever comes, one, the conflict's coming home, but in this conflict, we don't behead a king. Maybe we remove him, maybe we replace him, but what's that going to do? He doesn't have the power. He's not the one calling the shots. He's not the one in control. That's in Downing Street,
Mhm.
right? That's in Parliament. That's in the city and county level governance. It's not the king, right? It's just, and by the by, this is the same here in the United States, right? It's not the president. He's doing everything he can. It's, you know, power is at the local level, always, ultimate power.
Mhm.
And as long as they can keep us at the local level from recognizing that, dealing with our own local governance and our own local systems and getting rid of people that don't belong and can't, acculturate, and you have to get rid of them. You have to, or you're done. But you can't do that by putting it all on some chap with the crowns, or sitting in the White House or sitting in Buckingham's. It's not him. You got to do it yourself.
It all comes down to diversion tactics as well. And I think with, mainstream media and how things have progressed in the last 10, 15 years, and just in terms of, I use this term loosely, news availability, it's very easy to direct even more so nowadays, it's very easy to
Yes.
direct and say, well, Trump this, Trump that, Trump this, Trump that, or
Yeah,
King
yeah,
Charles
yeah.
this, King Charles that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I don't think that helps. I don't know if you wanted to appreciate actually a lot of the audience, despite being English myself, as I like to say, actually most of the audience that listen to this are actually from the United States. So I don't
Uh,
know if you wanted to dip in a little bit into what's going on there, and then we can wrap up from there if that works for you, Ian.
yeah, okay. So we are also in the last stages of cold civil war in the United States, and you can see it in the courts, right? Um, the English Civil War and later American revolutions, if you look closely, there were years of back and forth all out in the courts, both in England around the crown and then, for the Constitution and Declaration of Independence and stuff here in the United States with the colonial courts, et cetera, right? The Crown's courts and the colonial courts. That's happening again. You can see it. You don't see it in the United Kingdom yet. We're not watching that kind of preparatory lawfare happen. We're watching it here in the US at and the Department of Justice is doing an extraordinary job. I had a conversation with Tommy Kerrigan about that and the use of grok, probably. Um, as a constitutionalist lawyer that's helping judges and others, lawyers, DOJ lawyers, et cetera, fight this fight. At some point, and I did a series of on Twitter's, I don't know, some months ago that was the about the American colonials did not go to war with the crown over taxes. They went to war with the crown because there was no redress in the courts. Well, that's what happened in the 1600s. That's what happened in the 1200s. That's what was set in place in the 800s, right? So this conflict and war that's played out for 1200 years always happened because we are a common law system. We are a common law people. If you want to see where we are, look to the courts. What's happening in the lawfare in the courts? You know, how are the courts usurping the power of the crown, or in this case, the executive? And how is the crown, in this case, the executive, fighting back? And that will tell you where we are. And generally, when the courts begin to believe that they're being actually out lawyered, out legaled, and they can't twist and abuse common law anymore and get away with it, then they generally use the bully boys. In the 1600s, it was the bully boys of the guilds, right?
Mhm.
Um, Here it's Antifa and all these others, and the cartels, et cetera, and then hot civil war follows. So we're in. Um, there's a great guy, Robert Gouveia. He's got a YouTube channel and he's following all this legal stuff very well, brilliantly. Um, Astounding things are happening where constitutionality is being restored in the United States. It's actually happening. It's brilliant. It's a fight that's needed to happen for 40 years. The On the other side, right, for the war fighting kind of guys and the finance and money guys, it's like, okay, it's awesome stuff's happening. That means conflict's coming. Means at some point, those who've been abusing the common law system for their own power, these financialist peoples and these kill chain peoples, they will go hot. It is inevitable. Now, when and where and how it happens, I don't know, because it's move and counter move
Mm. Yeah.
and funding and counter funding and now the enemies of the English speaking peoples, because this fight's happening everywhere in the English speaking world. It's not just the United States, not just in the United Kingdom. It's in Canada, it's in Australia, it's in New Zealand, it's in greater India, Pakistan, right? So this 400-year great cycle has been embedded all around the world over the last 400 years, not everywhere in the world, but in the English speaking world. This conflict's happening all over, and it's locust in the United States with respect to this lawfare, right? This defense of common law, this restoration of Alfred, the dooms of Alfred, is happening at some point. Um, at some point, it goes hot. That's what's happened. Now, um, Neil Howe and Strauss and Howe worked out that it would be sometime in the 2020s.
Mhm.
It's looking now. He's come back later. Neil Howe has and said, no, this. The sequel is spreading back out time-wise again, back to older kind of patterns, and I think he's right about that. I don't think we get to the crisis, culmination of this for another, maybe not in this decade. Maybe we don't get to the bloodshed till the 2030s here in the United States. And maybe it'll be low, who knows exactly how that's going to play out in the United Kingdom and Ireland, the old core of the English speaking peoples. I don't know how this plays out. I don't know, because the way in which these financialists work is they force this racial cultural stuff hard
Mhm.
until you have no choice but to react violently and react, to genuinely preserve yourselves. And they do this because they want you to go too far, because then they're going to use that to shame you for the next 80 years, like they did the Germans. That's another form of control, right? This is an estrogen way of thinking. So we're trying as hard as we can in the United States in this constitutional fight that's happening in the courts. It's brilliant. I'm watching them. It's just astounding. Uh, the partner of that is this conflict that's happening in the financial markets and in the capital markets, and that's not the stock markets. It's the banking, the finance,
Mhm. Mhm.
the bond markets. The sophisticated stuff. Those fights are all out, and it's for everything. We're not going to get the world war. So, because Russia and China and Iran have proven one to be too capable, and 80% of the world's like, yeah, we're not doing that again. We we don't want to we don't want to do that again. So you guys do what you got to do. So to your question, what's happening in the United States is there's an all-out effort, brilliant, beautiful. Look at what's happening in the courts. Look at this fight around the Department of Justice. Look at the Supreme Court having to step in, and they've got to get their stuff together, et cetera. But this restoration of the dooms of Alfred, the English common law, the English system is happening. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. What's happening with the financial systems to transition power and control of our economic and financial futures and taking that away from the city of London, which is really Amsterdam for the first time in 400 years. Brilliant. Brilliant. But those who've been parasitically living off of us for 400 years, those that have made and blown trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars and millions of our lives, they're not going to give up without a bloody fight. It just doesn't happen that way. And how and when it kicks off, I don't know. The only point I say is, again, back to this same thing, and it's same with the president. There's two things we need to be very careful of to not let them push us into. One, we don't kill a king this time.
Mhm.
We don't turn against and kill our king because it turned out he wasn't the problem. He was the one standing in the way, in their way. And the second thing is that while we're going to have to get back to our lands for our people, we don't go hard ethno-Nazi nationalist, genocidal, murder and slaughter. Which, for all intents and purposes, in the English Civil War, that's what that was about the Irish. What did Cromwell do to the Irish? Killed 20% of them, right?
Yeah, my
So,
one of
mhm.
my business partners is Irish, and I've been
Mm.
I've been over there a few times, both to Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And
Yeah.
yeah, although yeah, although depending on who you speak to, they will not have many nice words to say for the English, and quite rightly so, given some of the,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
not most of the atrocities that have been uh, happened over the years. It particularly Cromwell,
Yeah.
particularly Cromwell. I will find it for people that want to read about that. I will find a link to the massacre of, I think it's pronounced Drogheda. I think, sorry if that's wrong, if you're a native speaker. I will find a link to that and I'll post it in the YouTube section or on Substack below. Worth reading about because it is absolutely horrific, and people will sometimes wonder why the Irish or a lot of people from the Republic of Ireland might not necessarily like the English, and that's just one of the reasons, especially Cromwell. So I'll find a link to that.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, totally, completely. Thank you for that. And it's completely earned, that animus. And we repeated it in the 1800s with the famine and et
Mhm.
cetera. But that being said, the Irish are still placeholders in the English civilization. They're core members, and they have been for over 1,000 years. Um, Europeans consider them to be English, and Europeans have been our enemies for over 1,000 years. And they're destroyed, Ireland, it's like a family member, right? It's like I got a younger brother, or a middle brother, right?
Mhm.
And there's three of us boys, four of us boys, and we're all ruthless and brutal to each other. And, growing up, and he's offended and upset about it. So he leaves the family and he's got a chip on his shoulder, and he hates the family. And so he goes and joins another group that's fighting the family, or, you know, um, at some point he realizes though that other group doesn't care about him. That other group just sees him as a backdoor way to, you know, that group hates him just as much as they hate the rest of the family. They're just using him as a way to harm the other brothers. And at some point he's got to come home, and the brothers got to, now they're older, now they're grown up, and now they're not, doing kid stuff to each other, bully stuff to each other.
Mhm.
And the brothers got to come back together as a family. It's the same with the Americans, right? We're all a family. We got to remember that before the end. And yeah, we've done, like all kinds of people, like every people's, we've done horrible shit to each other. And we've done horrible shit to other people. But we're a family. We're a pretty good family. And we've also done a lot of good for the world. We're still
Mhm.
doing a lot of good for the world.
Mhm.
And we can't let them tear us apart. We've got to come back together as a single people. We are the English speaking people. We are a civilization. We need to stop trying to be Europeans. We need to stop trying to be this or that or that. No, no, no. Our ancestors developed in direct refutation of that, right? The peoples who, up till, the last 60 years ago, last 80 years or so, the people who came here to the United States were coming here to live as Englishmen in direct refutation of where they come from in Europe and other parts of the world. And we need to remember that. And and when our Irish brother comes back, we need to apologize for kicking the living shit out of him when we were teenagers.
Yes, yeah, it's a lot of yeah, a lot of people have done well, a lot of people, a lot of civilizations, a lot of different languages. We've all done a lot of nasty shit to each other, as you said. Yeah, I don't think anyone could disagree with that, to be honest with you. But yeah, do as I said, I'll put a link to that massacre because that is of all the things that the English have done, especially from an Irish perspective, that is probably the one I would say
Yeah.
that most wrangles. Yes, you could argue about the plantations in the north, and we're not going to go into that. That's a different podcast. But certainly from a one-off event, it's the massacre. That massacre. I'll find the link to that, and I recommend you go and read that for those that want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It's a
Um,
great stain on the English peoples. Yeah.
it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
So just to summarize just to summarize everything before we wrap up. So we've gone through 400-year cycles. We're pretty much at the end of a 400-year cycle. And because of being infiltrated with financiers, bankers, etc., going all the way back to the 17th century, in particular, the Inglorious Revolution of 1688, inception of the Bank of England in 1649. We're now
1694. Yeah.
60,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, yes, so I'm thinking of
Yeah.
executions now, 1694. Thank you for
There you
correcting me on
go.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've covered all of that. We've seen that the playbook is quite similar, and what's likely coming down the road, as you've alluded to, is there will be hot war. It could be at home. More than likely, it could be at home. But what history has shown us is that it will more than likely happen. We might take a couple of steps back, yet, like a phoenix from the ashes, the English speaking language, the civilization will more than likely come out even stronger somehow than it already is.
Yeah. And it's, yeah, very well stated and very good summation. What comes out of the end of these cycles, going all the way back to Alfred at least, and again, really you could look at the departure of the Romans in the 400s and the arrival of the Romans in 44 AD, right? As also part of this cycle, because those are, again, 400 years apart, right? 400 years before and 400, but what comes out of the crisis, the culminating event, this culminating crisis event, which by the way is coinciding exactly with the saeculum crisis phase, is a restoration of English civilization, the core principles and values of English civilization, and a more refined and more sophisticated articulation, codification in formal documents, formal constitution, etc., of the distribution of power between people, princes, and parliament. People, the oligarchs, the wealthy, the uber wealthy, the really wealthy, powerful wealthy, and government. And again, to your question about the United States, if you see what's happening, what I believe very firmly is going to happen now, because the US Constitution is the greatest distillation of English civilization and culture ever, right? I believe what's going to happen is a restoration of constitutionality, the refinement of arguments around certain key points that hadn't been adjudicated before.
Mm-hmm.
And primarily what will come out of that, and you're hearing this in Trump and other, just Trump, because Trump's just a man, right? He's just one guy who's put forward. He's not all powerful. He's not, he's not an absolute monarch, and even absolute monarchs have never had that kind of power like people think, et cetera, right? What I believe will come out of this in the end is a solid restoration of constitutionality, adjudication of some things that were left quite, a bit uncertain. And at the core of that will be a restoration of individual sovereignty and private, property rights, personal private property. And that will necessitate getting rid of this parasitic financialists from the continent that have been, so weighing us down and destroying us from within for the last 400 years. And that will happen, it will start here, it's already happening here, but that will then go to all of the core members of the English civilization. So the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and who knows, India is India, right? But
Mm-hmm.
India is still a first ring member of the English civilization, and we need to remember them too. But I think that's what's going to happen. Unfortunately, how it happens, how the conflict comes, et cetera, I don't know exactly. Does it mean necessarily that there's going to be, fields at Bannockburn and battles on, what I mean? Is, we're going to go back to Stirling, Stirling Bridge and these kinds of, probably not, right? I mean, well, okay, that wouldn't be fun. Stamford Bridge, et cetera. Yeah. So I don't, I don't know that happens in the United Kingdom, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there's the restoration in the United States. We fight it out here, bloodily, because we've got to get rid of the cartels and this, all of the, criminal elements. It's all very real. We've got to get rid of them. We got to get rid of the terrorists and everybody else. So that's a real fight. So maybe maybe the bloody fight happens here. It doesn't happen in the United Kingdom. but the restoration here then goes back to, right? So I don't, kind of where my thinking is. I don't think we get into the worst of it till the end of this decade, into the first part of the next decade. We're probably not done with the actual cataclysmic culminating event till latter part of the next decade.
Well, let's see what happens. I think
Yeah.
on that note, that's a very good place to finish off this episode. I would say it would be an honor and a pleasure to catch up again, probably at the start of next year, just to you get a lay of the land, see what's going on, and maybe we can put some more layers on this cake, so to speak, and chat through some stuff. 'Cause I don't know about you, I thought that was incredibly insightful and really enjoyed this conversation. Ian, I've got here because I always like to direct people to people's, social medias and
Yeah,
so
yeah,
forth. But I've got here on x.com, Burlingame, and also emburlingame.substack.com. Again, I'll put links to all of these over on YouTube in the Substack post that comes with it, etc. Any other places where people can find you, or is it just X and Substack?
I have some books on the one I would direct towards, maybe two of them, is The Eternal War and The Art of Being a Man. They're both on Amazon.
Mhm.
And then, I have LinkedIn. I've done publishing stuff there, but I'm rarely ever on there. So X is the best locus. And by the by, I got to touch upon what you said about putting more layers on this cake. That's one of my favorite movies, by the way.
Layer cake.
Layer Cake.
I haven't seen it for a while, but yeah, it's very, very good. I remember that came out at a similar time as I think it was Snatch. And Snatch was good, but
Yeah.
Layer Cake was
Um,
fantastic.
yeah, that was yeah, levels above. Yeah, yeah. I like Snatch too, by the way, but um one's takes place amongst the caravans and the other one takes place in Hyde Park or Mayfair, right? It's like the difference there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a pleasure. It really has. I think we've
Thank you.
uncovered a lot there. It's been a really good and fun conversation. Again, I'll reach out at the start of next year. It'd be fantastic to have another conversation, and look forward to speaking to you then. And as I said multiple times, a lot of things have been mentioned in this podcast. I'll make sure to summarize it as best as possible in the notes section below. So go and check that out, and please do go and subscribe to EM's newsletter and do follow his writings as well. Highly recommended. EM, thank you very much, and look forward to catching up soon.
Appreciate it.